Good morning. Welcome to The Mint. I'm Andy Hodges. In our main story this morning, Zimbabwe is hosting the 16th edition of the Regional Energy Regulators Association, RERA, of Southern African Annual General Meeting, AGM, and Conference, whose key focus is on interrogating alternative options to ensure improved energy security in the region. This year's event, held in Victoria Falls, was running under the theme Creating a Conducive Environment to Enhance Regional Energy Security, Trade and Investment. The conference, hosted by the Zimbabwe Energy Regulator Authority, RERA, comes at a time when the region is going through a severe power deficit due to increased demand and suppressed production as a result of climate change and stunted investments in the energy sector in the region over the years, resulting in a number of countries in the region resorting to load shedding as part of mitigation measures. In October 2019, Zimbabwe raised electricity tariffs by a massive 320%. This followed a similar tariff increase earlier in the year. As part of their submissions for a tariff hike, both ZPC and ZET-DC singled out the major cost driver to be the high inflation, which has eroded the previous tariff, increased cost of diesel for the Hwange power station, which gobbles at least 1.5 million litres per month, increased prices for procuring coal, around 72 million per month, and financial obligations related to power imports, around $19.5 million per month. At the AGM, the acting CEO of RERA, Eddington Mazambani, had this to say about tariffs.
We all agreed as regulators that we need to move towards cost-reflective tariff. You will recall last year there were two adjustments which happened, one in August and another one in October. That's what we're trying to achieve, to get to cost-reflective tariff. And we expect that we're going to do that. And you also, while we're doing that, you spoke of the issue of affordability that some people might not afford. Our tariff structure, it encourages less consumption of power. It actually caters for the low-income earners, because we expect those people not to have huge demand for power. So now what we've done, our tariff is structured such that the first 50 units are at a certain price. Then the second 150 units again are at a certain price. The first 50 units are at 41 cents. The second 150 units are at 91 cents. And then thereafter, you now get in the full tariff applying to you. And we expect that the people who actually consume power in excess of 200 kilowatt hours in a month, those are well-off people, they can afford it.
With regards to the availability of electricity, the acting CEO of RERA spoke about enhancing power generation in the Southern African region.
Environment to enhance regional energy security, trade and investment. The idea is to package the region as a destination for investment. That's the only way we can, try and reduce the power deficit within the region. Because as we speak right now, the whole SADC region has got a power deficit. Zambia and Zimbabwe, because of the climatic change which has affected Kariba. In South Africa, they've got some issues with some of their plants. So as a region, we do have a deficit, and we are now trying to package the region as an investment destination for investment in both power and fuels. Even when you talk to the issue of wanting to create a regional energy regulatory authority, the thrust again is to package the whole region as a one destination for investment. Both individually as companies, we've got different risks profiles, and we might not have the adequate market muscle to attract investments. But when you look at the whole SADC region and you package it together, you are looking at a much bigger market, which has got a lesser risk in terms of success.
The Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe has provided funds to enable oil companies to access fuel stocks that were already in the country, but needing payment to be released. Deliveries to service stations were expected to improve from last week. The RERA acting CEO, Mr. Mazambani, said going forward, fuel availability would stabilize as the RBZ was working on long-term measures to deal with the supply side.
The Reserve Bank is tasked to ensure that we structure facilities for fuel, and I haven't been briefed of the contract. I think such financing arrangements are being done, and we expect that fuel supplies should improve. And also there's something within the monetary statement by the Reserve Bank government, which is allowing people who have access to foreign currency to import fuel directly on their own for for sale to people with foreign currency at the forecourt. At the moment of RERA, we are crafting regulations to ensure that that arrangement is actualized and is made to be formal, it's structured, and it's just got an open way of operating. So very soon we'll be publicizing outlets which are allowed to sell in foreign currency, and that on its own will relieve pressure of sourcing fuel, because those who have got access to foreign currency will then source their own fuel and sell it in foreign currency, and the reserve bank then will cater for the general public who have no access to foreign currency.
For the Mint, Africa Moyo of the Herald filed this story. Energy and Power Development Minister Fortune Chassis, who was in Victoria Falls to officially open the RERA AGM and conference, said the government was working tirelessly to address the shortages. He said, and I quote, "We are always in the mode to deal with shortages of fuel. Actually, you understand the genesis of our fuel shortages, which is heavily linked to shortages of foreign currency. As a result, until such a time we have foreign currency sufficiency, it makes sense to say we have some level of shortages of fuel, which is consistent with the available foreign currency." The minister further said that we will come to a time when we have plenty of supplies in the country. Zimbabwe citizens in fuel queues and suffering 18-hour electricity load shedding? Sure hope so. Last week, the government of Zimbabwe successfully raised $200 million through the first Treasury bill auction of the year. At the end of last year, TB auctions were largely underwhelming. A $300 million float last October received an uptake of just 27%, around $81 million, pointing either to investor fatigue in the government-issued debt instrument or market concerns over returns in an inflationary environment. A $200 million float of 270-day paper the next month yielded a 52.5% uptake. The Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, RBZ, announced that its latest float of 272-day TBs to the tune of $200 million had been oversubscribed by $70 million. Total bids amounted to $270 million, with the highest rate on offer at 30% per annum, while the lowest was 14%. Out of the total bids, $200 million was allocated. Monies raised through the TBs can increase money supply, especially to the extent that it is spent on subsidies. TBs are used by the government to raise budgetary support for critical public programs in view of limited external support. And in the absence of large-scale re-engagement with international donors and lenders, the authorities remain highly dependent on monies raised through TBs to finance fiscal stimulus. Official figures from the RBZ show that subsidies on fuel, electricity, grain and other essentials, particularly in the first half of 2019, caused an increase in reserve money, which rose from $3.3 billion at the end of December 2018 to an estimated $8.8 billion as of December 2019. The country's monetary authorities have, however, maintained that they will maintain a strict reserve money program. In the monetary policy statement last week, the Reserve Bank Governor, Dr. John Mangudya, said the bank was working on measures to further entrench stability of the Zimbabwe dollar. The cocktail of measures will entail stricter control of money supply growth, inflation targeting, and enhancing currency stability and transparency on the interbank market by using an electronic trading platform, the Reuters trading system. The governor further stated that the thrust of the central bank is to stabilize the economy by bringing down inflation and stabilizing it after the initial burst of high inflation that resulted from the liberalization of the exchange rate and fiscal consolidation in 2019. In his November budget presentation, the Minister of Finance, Mthuli Ncube, forecast that Zimbabwe's economic growth rate for 2020 would be 3%, buoyed by the agricultural sector, which was forecast to grow 5% in 2020. The minister, however, would not give Treasury predictions on the year-on-year inflation rate. The RBZ, however, predicted that month-on-month inflation by year-end would be at 2% and year-on-year inflation would be at 50%. Joining us on the Mint this morning is Tafadzwa Chikumbu, socio-economic analyst at the Zimbabwe Coalition on Debt and Development, ZimCod. Tafadzwa, now, with Zimbabwe in the midst of a drought and a below-average agricultural season appearing inevitable, do you believe that the forecasts given by both the Reserve Bank and the Ministry of Finance are actually achievable?
Oh, okay. In terms of the agricultural output, I think, yes, it is quite dangerous as well for the government to rely solely on rain-fed agriculture. And I think in the case of Zimbabwe, we have more than actually 70 to 90% of agriculture in Zimbabwe. It relies entirely on rain-fed. Yeah, and if the rainfall season is not favorable for us, it would actually impact heavily in terms of that particular output. And even in terms of the economic development, you know, we're an agro-based economy. We should not deny that, despite several years of droughts and probably natural disasters like cyclone last year and some El Ninos which have actually reduced the output. But I think the predictions...
economic growth, 3%. Is that 3%. Doable?
Economic growth of 3% by year end. I think based on the fact that last year we had a recession of around negative 6.5%, this for me proves to be slightly higher than what I would actually project myself, because 3% is actually closer to the global forecast, which is around 3.3%.
In Africa, I think growth, I believe they forecasted 2.4 to 3% as well.
So Zimbabwean growth is actually expected to be higher than...
Right, now, money supply growth has a direct link to both inflation and, of course, the exchange rate. Money supply growth in Zimbabwe is mainly driven by the government. Is the Zimbabwe government adequately managing money supply growth and also its debt?
Oh, okay. Looking at the money supply in Zimbabwe, it is actually rising, especially owing to the cash shortages in the banking sector. And the Reserve Bank governor has actually indicated that the bank is gradually introducing new banknotes and coins into the economy to ensure that they ameliorate the challenges around shortages of that particular cash. But I think the challenges we have is that all the cash that is getting into the economy, they find its way into the black market. It's not circulating within the banking system, and as a result, it will actually fuel inflation. And it is unfortunate that there is no direct link between the money supply, because when the money is deposited into the economy, it finds its way into the black market. The black market, which actually is pushing the interbank rate and even the black market foreign exchange rate. And most of the businesses in Zimbabwe, they're actually banking their prices or rating their prices against the US dollar. And as a result, we are likely to have inflation rising as a result of the
and what about debt? Do you think that government has its debt under control? What do they say? Eat what you kill, so to speak?
I think this has been a policy that has even implemented in 2019 when we implemented austerity measures to save so that we repay our debts. But I think because of the overwhelming demand on public services and social services, looking at the health sector and other sectors that require funding, like the electricity, fuel shortages and so on and so forth. So the challenges they have is that the government is actually fighting so many crises, and as a result, it is actually overwhelmed.
And of course, the main one, of course, is food importation.
Yes.
Now, an incredible revelation in the February 2020 monetary policy statement is that 200 entities hold 50% of the 34.5 billion Zimbabwe dollar bank deposits. The concentration of bank deposits in the hands of the few is taking place at a time when extreme poverty is estimated to have risen from 29% in 2018 to 34% in 2019, an increase from 4.7 to 5.7 million people, that's according to the World Bank in 2020. Wealth appears to be concentrated in the hands of the few elites at the expense of the majority poor living in poverty and deprivation. So Tafadzwa, how can the government address this widening inequality gap?
Okay, I think to start with, the inequality gap in Zimbabwe is, there are so many faces in terms of the inequality. We have income inequality, gender inequality, inequalities that are socially driven. And I think the government, the first port of call is for the government to ensure that they give social safety nets. I think if you look at most citizens, they are not able to afford health services, they are not actually affording education services. Fees are going up in primary, secondary and tertiary institutions, but then citizens are calling for government to provide a subsidy where probably the ordinary citizens pay, or the students do pay a particular amount, and then the government also pays the balance.
But this is a vicious cycle. You talk about social safety nets, which let's put that and call it what it is, which is subsidies. Subsidies, of course, requires government to raise more money, which means issuing more debt through possibly treasury bills, okay, which leads to increased money supply, which leads to an increased exchange rate depreciation. This is a vicious cycle. There's a lot of balancing activity to do by government.
Yeah, so the government is faced with so many challenges, I would say. And in trying to address those challenges, they should always prioritize the ordinary citizens. Like you said, you know, the gap between the rich and the poor are widening on a daily basis. And if the government does not take a deliberate effort to bridge that particular gap, it will continue to widen.
Now, whilst the Reserve Bank celebrates the relative stability in interbank exchange rates, it has little impact on the economy as a whole, as the market only responds to the parallel market rates. So, Tavazo, do you think that the interbank market can be transformed into what I would call a proper market? And how will the Reserve Bank be able to manage the exchange rate without the necessary reserves to defend it?
I think in the first instance, the Reserve Bank governor himself, he actually noted that the economy declined in 2019 as a result of liberalizing the foreign exchange market, and also because of the fiscal measures that were being implemented by the Ministry of Finance. So in the first place, de-dollarizing, if I would say, was prematurely introduced. And as a result, we tend to realize a lot of challenges in terms of how the interbank exchange rate system is being managed. But that as it may, I think the central bank also noted that there are a lot of secrecy around how the interbank...
Transparency.
Yes, there's no transparency in the way things are being handled around the interbank exchange rate system. So it only requires political will, both by the government and the Reserve Bank itself, to ensure that it ensures transparency and accountability, who is benefiting from the subsidy in terms of importation of fuel, who is actually benefiting from this foreign exchange subsidy in terms of importation of maize and so on and so forth. So without that, I think it is very difficult.
In fact, I've called for a proper auction system. But anyway, the RBZ stated in its MPS that it was happy with the progress being made in Zimbabwe towards de-dollarization. Under the de-dollarization framework, the monetary policy statement anticipates that the country will need 5 years to fully de-dollarize. It feels like, however, that on the ground, the country has in fact again dollarized. What's your comments to that?
Oh, okay, yeah. I think the RBZ would actually argue that no, we are not re-dollarizing, we are de-dollarizing. But I think the fact that they are selectively giving licenses to businesses who can operate and trade in US dollars is actually towards re-dollarizing again. And I think that particular issue has implications, especially around the issues of inequality that we were just talking about. Mindful of the fact that currently we have a multi-pool pricing system where other individuals are trading in US dollars and others are trading in eco cash, in cash, bond notes, bond coins. So I think for me, the issue of selectively giving licenses to the business community is actually fueling inequality among citizens, but at the same time, I would see the US dollar coming back, because if you walk into selected pharmacies, if you walk into selected shops, they are still taking US dollars.
In fact, almost every single shop, if you want, you can pay in either US dollars or even sometimes they will take eco cash, but at the parallel market rate.
Yes.
So in a way, what's happening on the street doesn't seem to tally with what the governor seems to be thinking is happening in terms of de-dollarizing.
Exactly. And if you look at the de-dollarizing framework, actually against the interbank exchange rate, you can only walk into a bank and sell your foreign currency, but you can't buy it back. And as a result, people still rely on the black market. And if that continues, people will still be using the US dollar. And if you walk into the market, and considering the 2% tax that has been introduced, it's sometimes getting more expensive to change money into eco cash and then you trade. Because if you walk into a bank to change your US dollars, you don't get cash. They actually transfer it as electronic
into mobile money.
Yes.
All right, now let's look at the You know, the Reserve Bank exchange controllers processed and validated blocked funds in an amount of $1.2 billion US. This is imposing unnecessary pressure on foreign currency in the country, considering that the validated blocked funds exclude the legacy foreign exchange obligations of $361 million US under the RBZ Debt Assumption Act. So, Tafadzwa, the question, of course, becomes, how will Zimbabwe be able to repay such a debt? I mean, that's almost a quarter of our total exports.
Yeah, actually, we're looking at debt. This is not the sovereign debt that we're used to, where the government, the public and publicly guaranteed debt. But they're actually talking about the debt that has arisen because of failure to remit the proceeds of corporates in their own currencies. And as a result, this is an additional cost to government to ensure that we get more new foreign currency. And I think there is a current program where the Zimbabwe and China signed a current swap deal where those that are coming into to invest into Zimbabwe, they actually exchange currencies with those that are operating in Zimbabwe.
It's so like a swap.
Yeah, a swap of currency,
yeah.
yes. So this is a situation where they will make payments in China in their own currency and also get the resources when they come here. But I think there are so many complications around that particular.
Because what rate do they, I mean, when eventually they pay that $1.2 billion US, that again is an additional cost to government, which implies its debt is going to go up. And we're back to that vicious circle. Yes. Raising money to pay debt, impact on money supply, impact on the exchange rate. So what?
Yeah, actually, for me, we are in a very tight situation, but I think we have actually accumulated that particular debt, and the amount that you are talking about, they are quite appalling. And as a result, the government, in one way or the other, it just has to repay that particular debt.
Tafadzwa Chikumbu, socio-economic analyst at the Zimbabwe Coalition on Debt and Development, ZIMCOD. However you look at it, it is imperative now more than ever that the government of Zimbabwe in 2020 manages its debt and that the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe manages money supply. If both do not happen, then the ripple effects will be increased inflationary pressure, higher cost of living for Zimbabwe's citizens, and an unstable exchange rate. ThinkNum Media reports that Amazon is now hiring for more than 36,000 openings. Amazon's hiring pace appears to be accelerating in 2020, and the company looks to cover the earth with its e-commerce and service network. Around the new year, Amazon was hiring for around 32,000 people. By the end of January, that number was at 34,500 openings. Amazon's hiring activity is global as well. While its American HQ2 in Virginia and new shiny office in Manhattan planned for 2021 are getting a lot of attention, the company is now hiring in at least 50 countries. The top 20 countries in which Amazon is now hiring hasn't changed much over the last year. A focus on technology talent in the US and India, along with heavy hiring throughout Europe and Asia. The tech company is hiring across, as I said, at least 50 countries, with nearly 23,000 of the vacancies in the US, 2,420 from India, and roughly 1,400 apiece from Britain, Canada, and Germany, according to analysis by ThinkNum. Most of the jobs are in software development, that's 10,400 of them, and nearly 2,500 in non-technical project, program, and product management roles. There are more than 2,000 jobs each in operations, IT, and support engineering, as well as technical project management roles. Several of the job categories are technical, operations, business, or logistics related, such as data science or hardware development. But Amazon is also hiring for 1,634 human resources personnel and 494 designers too. The company also has needs for 407 customer service operators, 380 writers, content creators and managers, and 89 audio, video, and photography producers. Amazon's focus on hiring in the US and India reflects where the talent is. That's it's going after, which is unsurprisingly focused on bringing in as much engineering talent as possible as the company continues to automate processes, streamline the customer experience, and over-engineer the company's supply chain and logistical challenges. Amazon's recent focus on hiring in India is reflective of a recent trip to the country by CEO Jeff Bezos, when he announced a $1 billion investment in digitizing small and medium businesses in India, along with plans to be exporting $10 billion worth of Indian goods by 2025. Reuters reports that South Africa's MTN Group expects full-year headline earnings to rise as much as 50%. There's still a slowdown from the previous year due to the one-off items including interest on regulatory fines in Nigeria. Founded with the South African government's help after the end of apartheid in 1994, MTN has been touted as one of South Africa's biggest corporate success stories, but clashes with regulators have distracted management and crimped growth. Oil-rich Nigeria accounts for nearly a third of MTN's core profit, but it has posed a raft of problems for the firm in recent years. MTN Nigeria has been dealing with a 330 million naira, around $1.1 million fine, for failing to cut off more than 5 million unregistered SIM cards, a substantial reduction from the original 1.04 trillion naira penalty handed down in 2015. In 2018, the group agreed to pay $53 million to resolve a dispute with the Central Bank of Nigeria, which has accused MTN of sending abroad $8.1 billion using improperly issued paperwork. In January, Nigeria's Attorney General said he had withdrawn a $2 billion tax demand against the group, bringing to a close its latest disagreement with the government. MTN, which is due to report 2019 results on March the 11th, said headline earnings per share, that's HEPS, would likely be within a range of 438 cents to 506 cents on the IFRS 16 accounting basis adopted at the start of the year. That is still slower than the 85% jump the company reported in 2018. It attributed the slowdown mainly to items outside its regular business, including interest on the Nigerian fines, foreign exchange losses, and hyperinflation adjustments. It also said it anticipated some drag from write-downs on payments linked to its business in Iran and the impact of asset sales made during the year. By pulling 99 phones down an empty street, artist Simon Weckert made it look like they were gridlocked on Google Maps. Artist Simon Weckert walked down the streets of Berlin tugging a red wagon behind him. Wherever he went, Google Maps showed a congested traffic jam. People using Google Maps would see a thick red line indicating congestion on the road, even when there was no traffic at all. Each and every one of those 99 phones had Google Maps open, giving the virtual illusion that the roads were jam-packed. Weckert told Motherboard that he did the hack art installation to get people to think about the space we give to cars in public life and the data we rely on every day. To pull off the trick, Weckert rented 99 smartphones, all of them Android devices, and purchased 99 SIM cards for them online. He said he'd spend an hour or two on each spot, walking back and forth on the street to generate a traffic jam. You've been watching The Mint. I'm Andy Hodges. Please follow us on our Facebook page, Zim Papers TV Network, our website, ztn.co.zw, and on YouTube under ZTN. Your comments are welcome via our Twitter handle @ZTN News and, of course, via Facebook. Join us here on The Mint every weekday morning at 6 a.m. Central African Time. Well, that's it for me this morning. Goodbye. Have a profitable business week, and you all be safe.